The time is September 1991, set in 1963 during the Vietnam War era, focusing on a young Marine named Eddie, played by River Phoenix, who is participating in a ritual game with his fellow soldiers. The Marines engage in what they call a dogfight, a contest where they bet on who can bring the ugliest date to a party. Eddie invites a shy, self-conscious woman named Rose, played by Lili Taylor, unaware that she is more than just a target for a contest. Eddie and Rose form an unexpected connection, challenging Eddie's perception of both himself and the world around him. This week, and also kicking off season 2 of Back to the Balcony, we discuss 1991's Dogfight.
Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, two titans of cinematic review. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong, but always captivating. Your hosts Antonio of the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and Justin Henson of the Movie Wire are here to take you back to the balcony.
Antonio, kicking off this season is one of those movies where I played Roger Roulette and just flipped open a book and this movie popped up. And to be honest, I'm glad it did, because this was a fate not only that I landed on it, but the mere fact I saw it, and I think at the right age to really appreciate it. And it was in my mid to late 20s where the curiosity of a real connection and the maturity of myself to realize the feelings over image. This one really resonated with me in a first time view, and even more so during a second, third, fourth time view. There's something to take out of this emotional connection to these characters than any movie that I can remember in the 90s. This one is one that I am so glad that we are opening up a conversation to kick off the season with.
Oh, yeah, and we've never even discussed this film. You've never brought it up in conversation, so you probably have no idea whether or not I've seen this film or not. It was just one of those complete surprises on the list, and I'm so glad you brought it because this is one of my favorite movies of the 90s. One of my favorites of indie director Nancy Zavoka's, I call it like the romantic trilogy. True Love with Annabella Sciorra, this, and then Household Saints, again with Lili Taylor. Great three little, low budget, very like, I'm not going to say obscure, but they were definitely of their time. Romantic dramas with a lot of comedy in them. And this one is my favorite. And it is also my favorite Lili Taylor performance. It's my favorite River Phoenix performance. And when you think of all the films that he's talked about after his early and untimely death, this is the one that I think the least amount of people have not only not seen, but not even heard of. And hopefully this will be a catalyst to get it more recognition. It did get a Criterion release this year, which was really exciting because I've had this Warner Archive DVD for years now. I never thought we were going to get another version. And so, yeah, I think the timing is perfect for this episode.
100%. And this one, I think, is River Phoenix's last great performance. And this is the one that really would have, I think, taken his performance off, because it really does show how subtle and powerful he is in this movie, that you don't have to be the one actor on stage to deliver your lines with every single intent being over dramatic or with the intent of proving something in your skill. He is overly subtle here, and it's even more impactful and it's even more powerful, especially with Taylor's chemistry with Phoenix, that these two are really just these awkward people that really do have an emotional connection. And we always had this curiosity watching this movie of the natural progression of these two, that it's awkward, it's beautiful. It's like a living poem watching these two progress in their discovery of each other. And I think one of my favorite scenes of this movie that it always resonates with me is the kissing scene, the one where they really have those awkward pecks. It is awkward, at times humorous, but sweet and absolutely beautiful, where the filmmakers here don't go for sexual intent. They go for a real build of chemistry. And I think out of any scene of this movie, this is a one that defines this movie on how these two really interact with each other. And I can go back to this scene and, without sounding creepy, watch it over and over again because this is a natural progression of young love discovering each other.
One of the things that I think I love about how Nancy Zavoco writes these movies and especially directs them is that even though we are in this really just hyper sympathetic state towards Lili Taylor's character, the real driving force of this movie is actually the redemption piece of the male character, River Phoenix's character. And she does it in Household Saints and she does it in True Love too, where it's like, we know how much hurt there is in the female character not being the prettiest girl in town. And it comes up later in the critique about, well, she's really not even that unattractive. But that's not the point. The point is, by doing this, he makes her feel even more unattractive and insecure than she already probably is to begin with, because she really isn't that unattractive. But that is just the surfacey part of the story. The real story is the peer pressure, the fact that this is at heart a good guy who keeps getting turned into the more, I don't know, misogynistic and piggish kind of person by his army buddies. The peer pressure, the toxic masculinity of, let's say, 1960s military mentality going into Vietnam. And that is played perfectly too, because it's not that we hate these guys. We understand what kind of world these guys live in. And if each of them had more of a story to tell in this motion picture, you'd probably get a lot deeper rooted reason of why they way they are. But that's not what the movie is about. The movie is about River Phoenix's journey and Lili Taylor's journey, but not once does any character in this film, even the so-called unattractive girls in the dogfight, not once does anything feel surfacey or stereotypical. Even with short amounts of time on screen, every character has depth, every character has subtext, and every character has a defining moment, even if they're short. And that's one of the things I love about this movie, is that even though it's about these two people, everyone gets a little bit of story told. And it's very rare to see a movie do that with so many characters when it's focusing on two people.
This is like the Romeo and Juliet of
Yeah.
society's pressures, and that's what I really like about it. And what I like even more about it is the fact that we're set in the Vietnam era, and we don't have a heavy hand focus. It's maybe like 1 to 2%, if that, of the movie. It focuses mostly on the build to that, on where the redemption is going to go with these characters. And you're right, every character is relevant here, even when we get to the party scene of the dog fight of these characters. They could easily be a dinner for schmucks kind of thing where they're just in the background, but they have great dialogue. They have some depth. They have some screen time to really build these characters, to make us feel for these characters and where they've been. Even when we get to the bathroom scene, we have this character really kind of tell us a little bit about herself. If it was any other filmmaker, they would have ignored these female characters and went to the heart of the boy's masculinity. They would have gone to the focus of what the dogfight is. The dogfight is just a small piece of this to really catapult these characters into a new level of redemption, love, and brotherhood, if we want to go there. So this is where I think it is smart writing, and it can only be written by a man named Comfort to really have this comfort with the characters. And it is absolutely brilliant writing. And it's not just brilliant writing, it's a care for these characters. It's a care for writing in detail that we don't see. And it's a shame that we didn't get more from Comfort on some of his dialogue. I would have loved to see what else he would have brought to the table in his life.
I think one of the other things too that is first kind of startling about this movie. This is 1991. We're the very early stages of like the indie film boom, right? The Sundance era of the 90s, and the profanity in this movie at first might be a little shocking to people, especially back then. This is before Kevin Smith. This is before Tarantino. So having this much profanity in a movie that isn't Scarface or a Scorsese movie could be off-putting to some, especially when it's a so-called love story. But that also speaks to like the realism of what these army guys were. Essentially, we are going to be using profanity to make ourselves more interesting because at the end of the day, we're just a bunch of 18-year-olds getting sent to war. We have had zero time in our life to create an interesting personality about ourselves. So we're going to try and out profane each other. That's also why I think the dogfight is a great catalyst for this story because no one's accomplished anything yet. They're all going to be sent to war, more than likely to die. And this is just kind of one of their almost hazing rituals. You know, it's like a vision quest or a walkabout, just in a weird sort of way. So that does work for me because a lot of the things I've heard about this movie in the past is like, why does it have to be profane? It is profane because that is part of these characters. It's like when you go to a middle school these days and everyone's cursing and swearing and using just a lot of, I don't know, misogynistic and sexist lingo, it's because they've had zero development into true personalities for themselves yet. So they use these superficial ways to express themselves, profanity being one of them. And it's perfectly demonstrated in the restaurant scene where he takes her on a date. She just keeps saying, "Why do you have to swear so much?" And just when you think that he's going to like watch his tongue with her, she essentially puts it right back in his face when she places her order. She's like, "I guess I'll have the fucking son of a bitch rice and a lot of goddamn Roquefort dressing on the salad." Like the little just bites of them back and forth work so well in this movie because it shows that they really do have a connection and an interest. They just haven't found how to manifest it yet. So they do it by taking turns of him trying to like coddle her because he knows that he's being a dick having her in this dogfight. You can tell that he kind of feels bad about it, but he wants to win still. So he keeps pushing through. And her just saying, "All right, if you're trying to make up for it, I'm just going to push it right back at you. It's now my job to make you feel even more of an asshole." And that is like one of the most perfect meet cutes ever. It's like, she's not just going to fall for it. She's going to play the game back at him. He's a good looking guy, but she's going to make him feel this big the way that she brings it back. It's just so, so good.
Well, I love that. And going back to your point earlier, is we talk about Rose not being the ugliest girl in the room. And to an extent, I think that Phoenix's character really, or Eddie, really has an intent to not view this girl in the beginning as an ugly character. There was an attraction there, and we can tell right from the get-go when he's drinking at the dogfight, or he even admits it in the movie. There was a certain attraction there, and we have to have Taylor have her moment to really reflect, not just to push it back on him, but to show that it's a mutual respect of attraction. And that's where we really see it. There is a relatability between the two to say, you know what, I can follow your lead here, and I'm going to not necessarily get back at you, but I'm going to kind of show your mentality to show that we can have a connection. I'm not just this mousy girl that's shy, that's quiet. I can have a personality that you haven't seen before because of your missteps and your misjudges. So it could go two different ways on it, of having that revenge, or you did this to me and I'm going to match your style, or I'm going to match your level to see if we can have a common ground of relatability, so we have something in common. So, and that's where I really found it attracted to the chemistry here, is we're kind of having that question mark as they build upon this. It's all up for interpretation, and how we have our past experiences in relationships is really going to interpret these two on how they actually progress as a couple. So there isn't going to be a right answer to this relationship and this chemistry as they grow, because everybody's going to be in a different position of viewing this, because everybody has been in a situation to kind of have that awkwardness, or to impress, or to kind of flex our muscles to say, I'm the guy for you, or I'm the girl for you.
And it's not even our main two characters that express that kind of energy. We learn like really early on, especially from E.G. Daly's character of Marcy, who is, she's gorgeous in real life, but does perfectly at playing like the ugliest girl in the dogfight, who explains to Rose exactly what the game is. And by doing that, and also having the other girls in the dogfight be a little bit more understanding of what they're really going through, it goes to show that they're a lot more comfortable in their own skin than these Marines are, right? So there is a female empowerment there that is in the subtext. And I don't think you have to be completely looking for it to see it. That these guys are playing such a superficial game, yet these women who, I don't know, maybe the subtext is they know that these guys are going to war and probably are going to die. So let them have their fucking fun. We're going to get dinner and dancing and drinks. Why not? It also kind of goes to show that they might not have been the first time in a dogfight, especially Marcy. Marcy knows all the rules, right? So I think that is the other part of this, where it's not just the lead characters that get all that careful handling with their journey and their personality traits. We get it in all other characters too. The army buddies, so we get a young Brendan Fraser making an appearance there, which is fun. This is pre Encino Man. We get Mitchell Whitfield from My Cousin Vinny, like just a year before. We're getting a lot of interesting actors, a lot of characters in this movie showing their chops. And again, with the subtext too, where it's like the three soldiers that go and get the tattoos while Eddie's out trying to make amends and trying to make the night better for Rose. I think there's something really poignant about that too, is that he does not get the tattoo with them, yet at the end of the movie, he does get the tattoo to almost honor them, because we're led to assume that they don't make it. That is a third act resolution for characters that don't really have a main part of the story, but it shows respect to the characters and their development and the way they develop his character. The movie works on so many different levels other than the main two. And we'll get to the ending and all that stuff in a minute, but I just really want to focus on that is one of the most impressive things about this script and the filmmaking is, like I said, there are no unimportant characters in this movie.
There really isn't, but and at the same time, there are so many nuggets in here of symbolism when it comes to how things are perceived. And again, we'll get into the ending in a second. But we have the tattoo scene where he doesn't get it. He chooses the main event with Rose where they are finally finding that awkward connection, and they're off getting the tattoos, and he's a single guy out because he's the one that's not following the crowd. He follows
Mhm.
his feelings, he follows what emotionally he wants to do. And it is a story of love and redemption that we will see as we get to the end. But this is a redemption story on so many different levels. It's a personal level, it's a love level, it's a friendship level. This is almost like a whole themed redemption story, not a love story. Because if we look at it holistically, if we're just to look at it at a surface level, this is Eddie going through a journey, and we can use Rose as the catalyst to actually support where he goes by the end of the movie, which is the exclamation point of where he ends up as
Yeah.
a man. Not a boy going into the army, a man. And this is where I think is really more about interpretation. And I can go multiple directions. I still haven't figured out this movie because I don't want to, because I love the multiple different perspectives of it, of redemption, journey of Eddie, or journey of Rose, if, as a matter of fact. But at the end of the day, it is solely about multiple characters' redemption.
The idea that Eddie realizes that Rose is a much more interesting person than he is. I think that's one of the great parts of the movie too. The fact that she wants to be a guitar player and a singer, and she is working for a living, and she isn't afraid to call him and his buddies out in an amazing monologue. One of like the best pieces of that movie is Lili Taylor's put down of the group when she finds out what the dog fight is. Like, how dare you? the That trope is amazing, but the other thing too about this movie is that it covers a lot of different genres, I could say, that I like. First of all, it is it happened one night type of movie. The majority of the movie takes place in one evening. I love films like that where they're not going to stretch it out over time. You're giving a window to your story, you're giving a window to your characters. It's an it happened one night situation. It's also a what now movie, because when you get to the third act and you get that kind of epilogue, that little bookend to it, it's not a clear representation of what we think the story is. It is a what now. It is a up to our own interpretation of what is going to happen to these people after this amount of time has happened and the experiences they've gone through since their one magical night several years before. to be able to take all of those things, are some of my favorite tropes in movies when done right, and have them all in one movie. How can you not at least have respect for that? That you are taking the audience on so many different emotional journeys that most films just focus on one of those and not multiple channels and multiple streams of entertainment. Again, that's just another cherry on top of this movie.
It is a great skill by our writer here to really have this dialogue just kind of drive in multiple directions, where it does, no matter what interpretation you actually take from this movie, no matter what road you take, by the time the credits roll, you're walking out of this movie, you're just sitting in a dark room, if you may be, and just thinking about where this journey took you. It's a big question mark on reflection of oneself too, because I remember the first time I saw this movie and I thought about this movie throughout the entire day of where this movie took me, what I thought, what the interpretation, what the theme was, whatever it may be. But there are so many things to take away from this movie that it is nearly impossible not to kind of rewatch it. There are some that might say, it's too slow, it's too boring, there's nothing that really happens. Though you have to be in a mood to be able to comprehend this movie on a deeper level, and you have to be at full attention to really appreciate what this movie is, the journey this movie is trying to take you on. And if you don't have a mere thought by the end of the when the credits roll,
Mhm.
rewatch it. Rewatch it, and I guarantee you, you will take something away of what the intent of this, what this movie is trying to do, because it is something that does have a little bit of everything to really self-reflect. If you can't self-reflect on this movie, I would question oneself.
Well, because it's about imperfect people, and all of us are imperfect. And there are other movies that have tried to focus on like the romantic connection of imperfect people. I think probably one of the most classic examples is Harold and Maude, but Harold and Maude is quirky. Where this, I feel that Paul Thomas Anderson probably loves this movie. I've never heard him talk about it, but if you go back and you watch Punch Drunk Love or especially Licorice Pizza, it follows a lot of the same tropes of like, these are not perfect people. These are not glamorous people. These are everyday people who are insecure in their own skin, or they use personality to overcompensate because they are not classically pretty or classically attractive. And that character is what builds the story. Licorice Pizza and Punch Drunk Love essentially swim in those waters. And I'm not saying that this film created that, but this film is an excellent representation and one of the most perfect examples of modern representations of those types of stories. Or like the Jane Eyre story, right? Two imperfect people isolated and they find love. It's kind of the same thing, just it found a different atmosphere to set that story in.
I think this one is more contemporary, even if set in the Vietnam era, than most of these movies now. Because you take Licorice Pizza, Punch Drunk Love, these are movies that mainly went for kind of the awkwardness, that forte the awkwardness with losing a little bit of natural human nature to it. This one is true human nature at its finest. This one doesn't care if it makes you laugh. It doesn't care if it makes you cry. It doesn't care if it makes you shed a tear by the end of it. It wants you just to feel something. It's not, it doesn't have a particular genre in mind
Yeah.
per se. It just wants you to feel something. When we go to a lot of these current movies that try to be the independent art house that has an intent to have those awkward relationships, it goes all in one genre and it doesn't take its foot off the pedal. That was my problem with Licorice Pizza, is it didn't really take us on a journey. It was a linear mode of awkwardness. We have awkwardness here, but it's done naturally and it's done earned. It doesn't take us on this huge journey throughout that is just sticking to its guns of this is the awkwardness you're going to get for 90 minutes of the runtime. That doesn't happen here.
And there's an economy to it where it can be challenging to create a period piece in modern times and make it feel genuine by keeping this very tight, by keeping its characters, its set design, where it decides to play the story out, keeping it very tight and contained. It can maintain that reality that this is the 60s, where I feel like other films that have tried to swim in waters like this in the 90s often overcompensated with art, with subject and art design that didn't buy, like it wasn't buyable for the audience. I think one example I'm going to use is Ben Affleck's Going All the Way from like 1996 to 1997. It's a World War II movie, kind of swims in the same waters of these, but it's too ambitious with its production design where it feels like I am watching a mock caricature of the 1940s. Or another example would be a movie that I like, but it's got a lot of flaws in the same example, and that's Grace of My Heart, where it's like 60s, kind of like the creation of Motown, supposed to be like the Phil Spector era, yet it plays too heavily in the time that it's supposed to be in as it travels through like the several years of the 60s into the 70s, and it all just feels a little cookie cutter and character-ish, not real. This being economical in its characters, in its set design, and where it decides to tell a story, I'm 100% convinced this is 1963 and this is a small little town and the war is coming because it doesn't play too big on the background. It focuses on the characters and just creates enough of a world for them to exist in without us feeling like, oh, we're watching a period piece.
It doesn't get caught up in that, and that's what makes this movie so special, especially as we get into the 90s, where it has to pick something to keep an audience's attention. This one still feels like the 40s leading up to the 63, I think the movie is placed, where we have, again, the females feeling they have to please the
Yeah.
males. They're going off to war. You still have that kind of subcontents, that feeling from movies we've seen past, but it doesn't go the cheap route and focus on that. It really does focus, like you said, on the characters, the relationships, the chemistries. And even when we have our other Marines, they're always together building
Mhm.
something. They're always together building that brotherhood while we have Eddie building another life, if you will, with Rose. So there's always a build with this movie that doesn't focus on the situational events in the background. It's always present and we always know it's there, but it's never a pivotal moment except until we get to the climax.
So before we get into the critiques of our critics, the ending is a debatable part between the two of them. And I think it's a very debatable subject for people who watch this movie because it can be taken in so many different ways. My question for you is, without giving the ending away, do you feel that that is a proper ending for the film after the journey we go through with these two people? Or is it a little too cliched or maybe taking the safe way out by not giving us closure? What did you want from the ending?
It would have been cliche if they gave us
I
closure.
agree.
So that is my takeaway. By leaving that pivotal moment, and that's what this movie banks on, is not saying anything at all. We get limited music, we get limited backgrounds, we embrace the silence. That's what this movie builds to, and it sticks to its guns. If it would have done anything different with this climax, I would have been disappointed, leaving the question mark of what's next on two different directions between the brothers and Rose. That would have spoon fed us an emotional reaction, and that would have lost the interpretation. This interpretation, like I spoke to earlier, you can go in multiple directions. If it spoon fed us anything, it would have ruined everything that it built to lead up to.
Yeah, because it's not like Forrest Gump where it's like the lovable idiot that everyone just hopes gets his chance. This is a guy that had his chance, could have blown it, and ended up going away to war and then taking the risk of coming back to the only thing that actually meant anything to him in his short life up until the war. And he doesn't even know how it's going to go. So, all the emotional journeys that we take with these characters leading to that end, I agree with you. Letting us have that ending be ambiguous and not knowing what the closure is between these two people, I think for him, all that matters is that he just sees her one more time. And regardless whether they stay together or it's a, hey, I'm a different person now and I thought you were dead and I moved on with my life, that doesn't matter. He just needed to see her one more time. And I think that was a perfect ending, in my opinion.
It's the perfect kiss to this kind of movie, and we get some hints prior to that while he's in the bar. But at the end of the day, though, even those hints don't even ruin it. It doesn't matter, and you can overanalyze it because at the end of the day, it's that final moment that matters. And there is, I wish there was more movies that would take a lesson from this playbook on not spoon feeding the audience and taking us on a journey with ourselves at the end of a a great emotional feature film.
This is where I get pissed off at how the 90s did go. You know, we can thank Tarantino and Miramax and Kevin Smith for making indie films big and people seeking out filmmakers and writers like this to make movies like this that become essentially eternal. This was too early. This movie did not get that kind of marketing and that kind of hype. If this had come out in 95, if Phoenix hadn't passed away, it would be a different story. I think this film would be immortal. Like, it would be held in the pantheon of independent cinema of the 90s, but instead it's a curio. It's something that people discover through podcasts or opening up a book and saying, what is this movie? That is such a shame. And I honestly think that it's because it just came out too early.
It did come out early, and I'd even push it a little bit further, where we had the Shakespeare in Love audiences finding new independent romances. I know, but the audiences were seeking a lot of movies like this out after that. And I think this would have had a better chance when we had a lot of those romantic independent films that people were seeking out after the Shakespeare in Love Oscar buzz, that this would have stood a bigger chance, because mid 90s, that was pivotal to a lot of blockbusters, a lot of these big things. And I still think that would have been too soon for this film. The appreciation, I think, would have happened in 98
I
plus.
agree. I think that's exactly the same time frame that I was just thinking of, because when it came out, it was dealing with things like Mrs. Doubtfire, right? And Hook. It had all of these big budget or big laugh movies coming out when entertainment was still the draw and not quality and efficiency and this indie darling lifestyle that we became so attached to in the mid 90s. So when it comes to the review of Siskel and Ebert, they kicked off their show with this film. And it's really interesting to me that they also covered Rambling Rose, which is another great movie that I think is so provocative and maybe too provocative for its time that it doesn't get the recognition it deserves. And to have these two movies together, I thought was really fascinating. I think they make a great double feature. But anyway, let's hear what our guys had to say about it.
Dogfight is a movie about young men and women, but it's also about the mood of America on the eve of the Kennedy assassination and the beginning of the Vietnam War. In an epilogue, we see those same two characters 3 years later, after there have been enormous changes in both of them and also in their country. In a way, the process that begins between them on that long night of the dogfight is the same process the whole country is about to go through. I really like this movie, which was directed by Nancy Savoca, the same woman who made True Love 2 years ago, and which is warm and sensitive and filled with idealism. And I greatly admired the performances by Lili Taylor and River Phoenix. Good act.
So yeah, he hit it right on the head. And he took it even deeper than me, where he uses the movie as a metaphor and analogy to the way the country was feeling before the Vietnam War, where it was very divided. It even got more divided as the war went on, where you had people that were very military-based, conservative-based, country-based, and then really the birth of the counterculture of anti-war, peace, love, sex, happiness. And we get to see how that happens in the 3 years that Eddie's gone and comes back. I never really think about the movie as a metaphor for the lifestyle and the culture of the time, because I'm so just drawn into the character story. But like you said earlier, the symbolism of this movie is thick, and that's why it's so good after so many rewatches, because you just keep finding new things.
This one is a hard film to review right out of the floodgates.
Yep.
And for Roger to take something away from it just shows his level. He's on the playing field. He knows what this movie is trying to do, and he does nail it in just a small snippet. And we're going to hear more from him. But this is the one where I think critics really didn't get a fair shake, and why I think having a deadline on film criticism really is a shame, because we should have a full-fledged review a week to 2 weeks to really take in a movie that we can feel needed a little bit more. I felt it the first time I saw it, that I had to rewatch it, that I wanted to take more from this film because it deserved a second rewatch, because I know there was more to just digest in this movie. So this one with Siskel and Ebert doing a 2-3 minute snippet, this one is going to be hard. But again, I am not going to give credit to Gene Siskel on this one.
Well, it's definitely a Roger movie, and that's first and foremost. And we can tell it was not a Gene movie because Gene says,
well, I think the acting is good. My problem was that I thought that the picture had a sort of logical conclusion when we see him in a shot going off to the off a bridge there. And I thought that we had set up the male-female possibilities of how people can relate to each other pretty well. Then we get things laid out a little bit with a heavy hand involving Vietnam and the Kennedy assassination, and I thought that was sort of routine stuff. And I have
that's only the last 5 minutes of the movie that you're objecting to.
Okay, my problem, I'll give you another, a minor thing, but it goes to the heart of this picture. I didn't think that I thought that she was picked was a manipulation, because she isn't wildly ugly like some of the other people.
It was the best he could do.
Is it me, or does Gene just sound like he is not 100% invested into this critique, almost as if he, I'm not going to say didn't see the movie, but normally when Gene has a qualm with a movie, it's when he is the most well-spoken and most literate, because he uses that opportunity to use his critic brain and critic voice to tear down the movie, so to speak, or debate or be contrarian to Roger's opinion. But in this one, he just feels so lost, almost unprepared. And it was really hard for me to understand how to rate his critique, because it's not even really critique. I feel like he's just searching for something to say, and it's weird.
So he didn't walk out of this movie. He did see the movie. He just fell asleep after the dogfight and woke up during the last 5 minutes. That's the only justification I could come from this review, because there's a lot of the heavy-handed Vietnam. That's when I woke up.
Out the
but
whole
there's
middle.
really nothing in between.
Yeah, he left out the whole middle.
Yeah. So it's like one of those, and I'll play devil's advocate. This one is a hard one that it may not resonate with everybody. We've had this discussion. It might not be for you.
This is true.
But at the same time, this one, this movie wasn't for him, just say it, because he's having trouble expressing his emotions, which a film critic shouldn't do, because a movie should resonate with you in some aspect. If you can't find a reason that you didn't resonate it, just say, I didn't get it, it wasn't for me, and leave it at that review. But the lot of the ums and ahs and it's heavy-handed, it is not heavy-handed. That's misleading and representation of this movie, because Roger's right. It's the last 5 minutes that we get anything in regards to war. You cannot even bring that up in the entire runtime of this movie as an excuse of why you didn't like this movie.
And you said something that really resonates with me, is the fact that when I recommend this film to people, I explain very carefully of what it is, of how it starts. I'm like, this is not a romantic comedy, and this is not a meet cute romantic film. This is a film about lonely people who cause each other pain, but that pain and loneliness makes them feel like they have to find out more about the other person, because there's just enough attraction there for them to not give up on that person, getting to know them better. But it's an uncomfortable journey, and that is what makes the movie so interesting. If it was just, I met a waitress and I fell in love with her before I went to the war, if it was a Forrest Gump Jenny thing, that's not interesting. We've seen that 1,000 times, but that's how he feels like he's explaining it. And that's not what it is. But you were right. Roger shoots right back, and he keeps on going.
Here's another one. Remember when he says to her, I tried to let you get out of it?
Yeah.
Remember that? There's a mistake in the movie, because remember, he tries to ugly her up, if you will, by putting lipstick all over at the same time.
He said, we don't really have to go in here, he says.
Then he puts it all over her. So the movie's trying to have
these are not objections that have anything to do with whether anybody would like this movie or not. These are really nitpicking.
No, I don't think they're nitpicking.
And as far as your first objection, which I presume was your most important one.
Yes, it was.
Because the other two are completely insignificant. He does come back after 3 years in Vietnam, and something does happen between them that I think is a perfect moment and a perfect epiphany for the movie. They have got to see each other one more time, or this movie isn't over. Well, you can't just go off into the sunset like John Wayne.
No, I think that the possibilities of how men and women will relate to each other, and basically we're talking about kindness or cruelty, which sets up the whole picture. I think that is said very clearly as I said, when he walks off to the bridge.
You would rather have an incomplete ending than to have it come full circle.
I can fill it in. I'm smart enough.
None of that makes any sense to me. And no, there's not a mistake in the movie. It's in the subtext, and you don't have to be a genius to figure it out, which is funny because at the end he says, "Oh, I'm smart enough to figure it out." No, you're not, because you missed the biggest point of that whole scene. Is that okay, if we are doing this, then I am going to try my best to win, and you are not ugly enough, so I have to ugly you up even more. That's the whole point, and he just skips right over it. I don't know, man.
I don't, and I think like you said, the cherry on top is I'm smart enough to fill in the context. You haven't mentioned one thing in your review that's significant to this storytelling, because this storytelling is about characters. You couldn't even mention that just for a critique of a critic to let people know what this movie is about. Roger went to the symbolic things on what to expect. He went into a brilliant segmented review of A, B, and C of what happens during the movie without giving anything away. All Gene does is the oohs, the ums, the ahs of this movie is about male, female, and that's about it. It's like he wrote the essay 5 minutes before he got into that seat before the show, and it just really doesn't make any sense. As a critic, there is nothing to take away, not one thing to take away from Gene's review to entice me to either see it or not see it. So there is nothing here for me to take away. If you say, did you watch Siskel and Ebert the previous night? What do you think about that movie? I don't know. Roger likes it, but Gene has no fucking clue.
I mean, it represents everything that I fear when I sit in front of this microphone, in front of this camera, when we do a show, or if I do a show on someone else's podcast, where it's like, do I have anything to say about this movie that actually means anything? Or am I just going to and ah and second guess what I'm saying and then come up with some bullshit answer? That's like my biggest fear. And I also do all the post-production on these shows. So if I do fuck up, or if you fuck up, I get to see it. And okay, how am I going to fix this? It's rare, but it is a thing. It is a thing that I always worry about, and we make it work. Maybe there's something with him at this point in 1991 where he's like, it's just a show. And even if I don't have anything clear to say, people are still going to tune in, and they're going to tune in next week. I don't think that they ever thought that people were going to be deconstructing these reviews 20, 30 years down the line like we are. So maybe it's that. Maybe it is just that sense of ego. It's like, okay, well, I can really just half-ass this one, and people are still going to tune in next week for the next 7 years until I'm gone, right? That's the only answer I have, because there really is no genuine criticism in his review.
It's either that or he understands that this was a small movie, something that probably would have been overlooked, and there was no time or effort into deep diving into this or any mere thought. He might have disliked it, that's fine, and that could have encouraged him not to put any critique in this, because you know what? This one did go under the radar. This one was a subtle movie, and two critics like that are obvious to what those movies look like to the general audience. It's just one wanted it to be bigger, and the other could care less because it just wasn't his cup of tea.
Right. And he wasn't like Roger or like a Leonard Maltin. He wasn't writing all these essays and books and companion guides that could expand on the thoughts and critiques that he had, where there are other critics that they would take whatever their film or TV review was or something in the newspaper, and they would expand upon it for the written page, for the book, for the video guide. You know, going back and reading Leonard Maltin stuff, I disagree with him so much on his scores of how he critiques the film. But one thing that I can't knock him for is, even if it's a bad film, he still gives a really detailed blurb about what it's about and the reasons why he didn't like it. It could be only maybe 50, 60 words in a blurb, but it tells so much. And this is not that. He doesn't have any words. He's not using his words, so to speak, to explain why he doesn't like the movie.
100%. And what I appreciate about Roger's review with this one is it really is an organized review. He put thought into it on how he was going to start it, how he was going to finish it, and he even supported what he planned ahead to debate Gene to actually enhance his review, to almost encourage people to go see this based on anything that Gene didn't say. He filled in the blanks for Gene, and this is one of his better reviews, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so let's just get right to that. When it comes to grading these guys, I cannot even give a monicum of credibility to Gene on this. It's a total bullshit. I'm not even gonna call it review. It's a bullshit 3 minutes of TV airtime where he has nothing to say. And the fact that he's trying to debate Roger, who's got plenty of things to say, he just starts trying to pick things out of the air of just enough conversation to get through that segment. And so for that, I'm going to start the year off with a F. It's an F.
I think I'm going to counteract that because this was a one-man show. This
It was.
listen to Roger. He has supporting facts. He has supporting commentary on why you should see this movie. And I love the fact that he calls out Gene of just over nitpicking. It makes no sense. He, even with the enough information that Roger gives on his review to support the movie and support the story and tell people what it's about, he still has enough time to shoot Gene down and debate it and fill in the blank. So I'm going to start the year with a solid 4 stars for Roger.
Yeah, it might be my favorite Roger rebuttal and favorite Roger review of every episode that we've done. It is that good, and it's not just that good because Gene's was that bad. It really was a very, in my opinion, perfect synopsis, review, and defense of what this movie is. And everyone should see this movie. Like, even if you don't think you'll like it from what we've heard, you just watch it, because even if it's not an entertaining film for all people, it's definitely worth the experience of one of the last great River Phoenix performances we got. Watch it just for that alone. I mean, Lili Taylor's great and everything, but to see what we lost when we lost River Phoenix, this movie, I think, is the closing statement of that thesis. It's the closing argument.
It's the one where he is just human, and if we take Sneakers out of it, this one would have been the exclamation point on his career, that it shows him in multiple ranges of humanity, and that's what makes this movie special. And to me, this is River Phoenix's last movie because there's really nothing that tops him as an actor. And again, not saying, to your point again, that everybody's good in this movie, but River Phoenix, I think, is more emotional for me in this movie because he went out on the highest note with this film.
And there's something that every time I watch this movie, I catch something different. And there's something that I really noticed on this one is that essentially the last 3 films that we got with him, so like, let's say Indiana Jones and Sneakers and Thing Called Love, he's got his hair long and in his face like half the time because he was being cool. He was that cool character. In this film, because I think we're so used to seeing him with that long hair dangling in front of his eyes, him with this military buzz cut, he almost feels like he's naked. He's exposed. We're seeing a part of him that we didn't feel like we were used to seeing in those final performances that he gave. We saw his whole face. We saw his whole head. So there was nothing to hide behind. And I loved that. That's why I think it is like the last great performance, because we're seeing the performance. We're not seeing the James Dean coolness behind the 90s hair in front of the face. It's something that I noticed on this last time around. I'm like, this is such an exposed performance from him because we can see him. And go back and look at some of his movies. You don't see him as well as you do in this movie.
It's almost like a rebirth of career that ended in tragedy. And you just made me that much more sad by your statement, by the way.
Well, thank you, because it's one of the things that, like, why does this performance affect me so much? And I think that's what it is. It's like we're seeing all of him, not just the cool version of him. So yeah, great conversation, dude. Again, like, I had never watched this review before, so watching it after watching the movie and getting ready for this episode, I was so pissed off at Gene, and I was so happy for Roger. Like, I mean, I'm always pissed off at Gene for the most part, but man, like, this one was a gut punch for me.
This one, hands down.
Okay, so before we get into the following episodes that are going to be a lot of listener and viewer choices, and like what we said, films that we're either not really familiar with, they might be first-time watches, or we saw them a long time ago and we need to rediscover them, essentially, getting more of those hidden gems, uncovering some of these more obscure films that they critiqued in the 80s and 90s. I got to bring at least my guilty pleasure pick to the show. You had Dogfight. I'm matching you with Blue Thunder, starring Roy Scheider and Malcolm McDowell and Daniel Stern. A classic early 80s movie about a super helicopter and the police force of Los Angeles. But what did the critics think of it? So I'm going to get that out of the way before we dive into those films that aren't our choice or not our favorites.
I'll buy that because I haven't seen that in years, and that is going to be a good rewatch. I can't wait for that one.
Let's see how well it's aged technologically. You know, and that's like 1982 or 83, and we're in 2025 at this point. I wonder what the technology is like.
Oh, good God.
Everyone, thank you for watching, listening. Please like, rate, review 5 stars on any audio version that you listen to, and on our YouTube channel. Please follow us, leave comments, make suggestions for films that you want us to review. As long as it was on either At the Movies or Siskel and Ebert, we will watch them. You can find me, Antonio, at thecultworthy.com. You can find my co-host Justin at
TheMovieWire.com.
And I will see you next week.
See you next week.